Well, hello everyone. I'm really delighted to welcome you all to TNC's latest podcast on the topic of is co-management the future model for your network? I'm John Waterhouse, CEO of Network Collective, and I'll be your host for the next 20 minutes. As I'm sure everyone joining knows, TNC is the UK's largest independent telecom strategy and sourcing consultancy, supporting over 280 major UK and multinational companies to get the best commercial, technical, operation and contractual results from their network and telecoms solutions. And joining us today to share his expertise is our CTO, Craig Northweth. Craig, would you like to say hello to our viewers and listeners?
Yeah, hi everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. Hi, John. Nice to have you back for this one as well.
Thank you very much. Glad to be back. Slightly hotter day than when we last recorded.
Slightly.
So this is a really interesting topic today. Not least, Craig, because you and I wrote a white paper about this a few months ago.
Yeah.
So great to get an opportunity to revisit it and to do a podcast about it. And of course, it is a really interesting topic in itself. So as we've been reporting for some time now through lots of podcasts and lots of articles, there is this technological revolution sweeping through the enterprise network market. However, harnessing sexy new technology is only part of the story. So for organizations to achieve their objectives of delivering magnificent, agile, flexible network services, it's not enough just to go after the sexy technology. You're also going to have to build an agile, flexible operating model to support and deliver that infrastructure. So we're going to talk today, Craig, are we not, about managed services, where the world is today, but crucially, what are these new models that are coming along and coming into the market to help organizations to really gain the benefit out of these new technologies that they're deploying. And I have no doubt we're going to start talking about programmable networks and intelligent networks and all these other sorts of things. So pretty interesting topic for today. So let's get straight into it. You know, I love flinging some questions your way. So could we start off today with just an overview? What is the state of the art today? What are most organizations and most people listening likely to be doing in terms of managing their networks?
Yeah, so I think it's a really good starting point, John. I think a lot of people listening, and obviously a lot of people that we interact with through these types of sessions or breakfasts or just general meetings, tend to be coming from a managed service environment, a fully managed service environment. So, you know, this traditionally would be a single vendor or a small number of vendors, managed service providers effectively delivering the full end-to-end support and infrastructure and software across their entire network. So when we talk about the network as well, you know, that could be within the wide area network, it could be the local area network, it could even be some of the contact center services. Traditionally, a lot of people have opted to go down that kind of fully managed service route. So they've got, you know, one single contract, one single support service, one single SLA effectively for the whole end-to-end piece. I think.
We're talking there like that full stack of services, right? So in a network,
Yeah.
you know, access, backbone, CPE, management, the whole shooting match in one contract.
Yeah, and I think the reason that's the case is that traditionally these things have always been interlinked. So you've always thought of the wide area network being the access and the CPE, you know, the Cisco or Juniper router that sits on the end of it, and then a demarcation point there into your own internal network. I think as we'll move on and talk about in a second, is we're starting to see them things slightly differently now. We're seeing some separation between them different components, which is starting to now drive, you know, a different way of thinking around how to manage the network and how to get the best flexibility and agility out of the kind of technology that, as we talked about, is evolving and, you know, rapidly coming into the market.
So, well, so, I mean, that's a perfect sort of entree into the second question, really, which is, okay, that's where most organizations either are today or certainly have started their transformation journey. What is it about that, let's call it the traditional model, which may no longer be fit for purpose, that's making organizations look at what they might want to do in the future that's different?
Yeah, so there's probably two or three areas that we can touch upon here. So I think the first, so if we start with technology, I think the evolution of technology is allowing, let's say, the simplification of management. So if it's within the wide area network, we're seeing things like SD-WAN capabilities being able to be centrally orchestrated through a web-based platform. We're no longer having to have the complexities of command line configuration to set up a site or make policy changes to a site. It's done quite simply through sort of drag and drop type capabilities on a central point. So the entry point effectively to manage the network has become much simpler. It doesn't necessarily require the intelligence and capability of a managed service provider to do. So I think that's the first point. I think the second point is, where we talked about the separation of technology now as well. So a lot of people, particularly within the WAN space, look at WAN access and WAN edge infrastructure as two separate entities now, because WAN edge infrastructure has become far more intelligent. We're starting to see much more consolidation and convergence of things like security services, or even virtual CPE and running other network services from there, which don't always naturally sit with a managed service provider like a telco. So starting to see that separation of saying, well, we'll keep our telco, our managed service provider, as providing access, but we want to take back over control of that overlay service and some of the intelligence and complexity and agility that sits within there. I think the final point to call out here, and it's always an important point for us, is cost as well. So, wrapping everything up into a single managed service provider tends to be quite a costly approach. We see various different price points in terms of the overall percentage of cost which is made up of managed service support from an MSP, and it tends to be quite high. And the lack of flexibility that you get sometimes with that model. People are starting to consider, can we do this better ourselves? Can we do it cheaper ourselves? Or is there an alternative approach to do this?
And that point about, can we do it better ourselves? I know one of the points we picked out in the white paper was around the at least the perception from end user organizations that sort of single provider model, the traditional model, is a bit slow and a bit clunky. Is that a fair comment?
It is, when you compare it to the potential capabilities that the technology delivers now. So, a good example of this, and we've used it with other customers before, is if you're going to buy into the kind of technology evolution and buy into the capability of having the agility and flexibility that offers, if you then wrap a managed service provider wrap around that, they tend to still work in fairly traditional model. So you effectively lose a lot of the benefit, the technological benefit, by overlaying a managed service provider in there. Unless, I'm not saying this is everybody's the same. There are some out there that are certainly better, and we're starting to see different people coming to the market, like service integrators, which are standing up services predominantly to support this type of technology. But yeah, a high percentage of the vendors out there will still act in a slow and clunky manner to get changes made, and again, still be fairly costly as well.
So given we've talked a lot about the drive for agility and flexibility in networks, obviously then leading on to leveraging new technologies where it's SD-WAN. I know we're talking more and more these days about SASE and all these sorts of different models. They're about achieving an agile network. I guess from what you're saying, it's you can start to see why the traditional managed service model perhaps isn't that sort of optimized model for the future. So I know through some research you've been doing, you'd looked at 3 potential future operating models to try and address some of these issues. Could you take us through those and how those alternatives might look in the future?
Yeah, sure. So I think the first one, and this one's probably been around, it's been direct competitors to the fully managed model for some time, is the in-house managed model. So you can think of this as outsource versus in-source. We've seen some organisations effectively take this route, particularly with the kind of off-the-shelf technologies like Cisco Meraki, for instance, and then just going out and buying local internet services. And having an element of success with that, from a commercial perspective and from a speed of deployment and a general management point of view. But we do also see some complexities with this model, in that the more service providers, the more kind of local service providers that you add to the mix, the more complex it gets in terms of service management, billing management, contract management, vendor management, because it can get quite complex quite quickly. So although there is a place for elements of in-house management, particularly around where you can add some intelligence and agility to the overall network design and network management, going full in-house is something that we've seen some organizations struggle with, just because of the complexity. I think we've got examples where actually, some customers have decided to go down that route, but then decided to pull some of it back into a managed model because of it's in the too hard to do box. So you've got to find the balance right with that one, I think.
And presumably in that you've got, there's a lot of kind of low level challenges in there of having sufficient resources, having the right skills, keeping people trained. There's lots of kind of quite kind of detailed challenges in there, which traditionally organizations haven't necessarily wanted to grab onto.
Yeah, I think so. It's a really good point. The kind of acquisition and retention of skills in this area, and particularly as that starts developing out into new technology areas as well, can be difficult. You've got to think to try and replicate the resiliency and sustainability that the MSPs have got, trying to replicate that internally, particularly if you're like a 24/7 business, is fairly challenging to do, and can be fairly costly as well. So the model's got to be right, kind of environment's got to be right to be able to support that in-house type of approach. The second option, which is a relatively new one, and we are seeing some of the MSPs actually offer this, but we tend to see this more in the kind of SI space, is this concept of build and transfer. So this is where a service provider would come in, effectively stand up the whole infrastructure, stand up the connectivity, stand up the contact center, whatever technology it might be, and then transfer the orchestration of that and the support of that upon completion. So this is quite attractive for some organizations where they've not got they've effectively got a pool of BAU resources, but not necessarily a large pool of project or development resources to effectively design and develop and deliver this type of capability. So we are seeing that becoming, I wouldn't say it's massively popular, but we starting to see quite a lot of interest in that capability to do that and then hand over the support either to their internal teams, more often than not to like another outsourcer that might be in the mix. So some sort of business process outsourcer or SIAM type outsourcer. Giving the keys to them once it's effectively been built and delivered.
That's interesting. So you get the specialist resource for the kind of the high intensity activities around design, architecture, deployment, etc. But once you've kind of got that steady state environment, you hand that over. That's interesting.
Yeah, so I think that will be one that we will see a bit more of in the future, because again, tied to the things around the limitations of the in-house model, skill limitations, being able to acquire and retain highly skilled people to be able to do some of this design and deployment activity. It's quite easy just to come and pay someone as part of a professional services bundle, get that delivered, and then transfer it back into the resources which over that period of time can train up, or you can give it to an existing incumbent service provider within the organization.
Interesting.
So I think the final model, and this is the one that we're probably seeing as being most popular, and this is across the board again, from an MSP and an SI perspective, is this co-managed model, the concept of co-management. So this is where we're starting to see certain capabilities and functionalities being handed back into the customer base. So that could be simple, policy management, routing changes, anything that can be delivered through the orchestration platforms or web platforms for things like change, is being effectively handed back into the customer to try and enhance that flexibility and agility of the management wrap. So this is this is where we see the best of both worlds, really. So you've still got a good solid single contract or multiple contracts supporting the overall infrastructure and the network, but you're also allowed, you've got the keys to go and tinker yourself as well. and make changes that are critical to your business, but do them rapidly rather than having to wait for the process of the MSP.
And I was going to say, presumably there's an element here of trying to sort of have the best of both worlds, that the customer has the agility when they need it. As you say, quick, urgent changes required to respond to, a business impacting situation or whatever. But BAU can continue to be outsourced and managed within that sort of contractual environment with the service provider without the need to resource it yourselves and so on.
Yeah, absolutely that. I think the downside to this model, and what we tend to see, is that commercially, so you'd think because the responsibilities are being shared, it would be cheaper than a fully managed model. I think in reality, it probably is still a fully managed model, but with some flexibility to allow the customer to do change. So it's still priced, and this is what we've seen so far, it still tends to be priced as a fully managed model. But yeah, with the ability to make some changes without having to go through the MSP process or SI process. So commercially, there's not any real benefits that we've seen so far. It's more around the kind of productivity and operational benefits in terms of being able to manage the network.
But it's trying to get that balance of, and I can see the customer logic that very often, the thing that sticks out to customers and stands out to them when they're thinking about their management models is, I remember an issue when such and such a thing happened. We needed to be on it we knew what needed to be done, and our service provider took 24 hours to make the change.
Yeah.
We could have solved that there and then. But whilst that is a great case for in-house management, it's not actually a great argument for long-term in-house management, because it's a one-off thing. Most of the other things that happen in the background are probably fine. So it's a way, I guess, of combining those two.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think that's a great example. I've personally had that in my experience in my life as well. You can see what the problem is, but you can't get it fixed because it's locked down. You've only got read-only access to certain things, and it's very frustrating. But then the opposite side of that is, would I want to be called at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning to fix every single problem? Probably not. So I still want somebody to manage that service for me and make sure that 24/7 we've got that capability, regardless of whether I'm available or not, or the team's available or not. So it's a good example. I think we'll see more and more of this. So the what you can do as a customer will probably increase over time, and I think we'll also start seeing much more automation being built in some of these processes as well. So that co-managed model, when we've got the orchestration that the customer can do, you're being able to maybe integrate that into some customer automation platform. So it could be tied into a ServiceNow, for instance, and start making changes that are automated and don't require that kind of human interaction once the issues have been reported. So I think we'll start seeing more and more of that going forward.
Yeah, but presumably, I mean, just starting to think about some of the sort of main pros and cons for these different models, and we've touched on a number of them as we've gone through. But just thinking about, perhaps if we start with the co-managed and work back through the options, I can see those benefits of the flexibility, the agility, whilst removing the complexity of having to design and build and manage your own network. Presumably, though, and you've talked about the I guess the downside of the cost. Presumably, though, one of the downsides of co-managed is you're still limited to the technology capability or the technology solution set offered by your service provider.
Yeah, so you are. So you still need, I mean, ultimately you still need a service provider in the mix with this model, and you are limited by both their technology availability and their capability as well. So you can supplement that with your own internal capability, and potentially you can negotiate the level at how co-management works, the key service boundaries. But you're limited by that. You've not got an open catalog effectively being able to select what technology you want.
Whereas presumably, which to some extent must be the case with the build and transfer, obviously the benefit potentially of the in-house managed is you can go and buy whatever you like because it's your problem to manage it. So as long as you're willing to manage it, you could go for any service provider, any vendor, any combination of services, etc. Because it's going to be your issue.
You could do that on a build and transfer to a certain extent, but then if you select a certain type of technology, you'll be limited to the specialisms within that technology within the market and who could do that kind of service for you.
Mm.
So I think the more away you get from the norm, the more likely it is that you're going to be looking at kind of a bespoke or boutique type of professional service outfit to be able to do this.
Yeah.
Which isn't not always a bad thing. I think particularly when we look at some of the agility and flexibility of working with someone outside of the big MSPs out there, people are starting to consider this now as well, and seeing the benefits of that. So it does open the market up quite significantly.
Yeah. So, I mean, just looping back to the topic, what we set out to talk about, is co-managed the future model for network management. I can see kind of where that thought process comes from, insofar as the other models, the managed services. Well, we know what the problem with that is: limited technology choice. It's potentially slow, clunky, it's inflexible, and of course it's expensive. In-house managed, well, all right, it's flexible. You've got wide technology choice, but poor blimey, if you're, a lot of organizations probably don't really want to skill up and staff up and resource up and technology teams, and that's hard to scale, hard to build, potentially lacks processes, etc. Build and transfer solves some of those, but you've still got to deal with that. So I can see why co-management ticks a lot of boxes. We used the term earlier on, best of both worlds, and it does feel like it has that element of, it's got the security of a managed service but has the flexibility of of that sort of in-house model. Is that where you see the market going over the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years? Do you think that's going to be the winner?
So I think it'll be driven by two factors really. So one the MSP approach, the proposition to the market, I think will start swinging that way, because it's probably seen as a value add. So we can give you access to make these changes, and you can have a little bit more control over what's happening within your environment. We're just going to provide the transport mechanism and make sure all the lights stay on and everything's fed and watered. But we'll let you do some more stuff, and that's as a value proposition, it's probably quite attractive. The challenge is, and you've called it out right at the start, is that would require a different operating model for the customer. So it will require some investment in people and skills and capability within the customer base to be able to actually consume that as a service. So I think the market will start shifting that way, but it will still also offer, because it is basically still dressed up as a fully managed service. They'll still do everything, or they'll let you do some stuff, or you decide not to do it. You do everything yourself. But it will come down to the appetite around wanting to change the operating model and take more of that service in-house. I think for some organisations we are starting to see some of this, because it's happening in other areas, like in cloud compute, for instance, and in security, and we're starting to see people build kind of a DevOps type culture, where they've got more ability to make changes themselves to the whole environment. I think as then things continue to become more and more integrated, and you're kind of designing things with security and network, in mind from an application point of view, it'll naturally, I think, start moving that way. But technology is probably not quite there yet to enable that to happen. But yeah, I think the general direction of travel will be a slow swing more back into giving the customer some more control over how things work. And yeah, obviously, as the next phase that we've talked about in the past, programmable networks, thinking of it as an API almost, then that's definitely when it'll start being factored into more of an in-house or development type capability rather than a traditional MSP type capability.
Fascinating as always, Craig, and as always, it always feels like a shame when we reach the end of our time and we've got to wrap up, because I know we could easily keep talking about this, and there's much more to talk about, but we have to draw it to a close. Our 20 minutes is up, and we'll have to save any further chat for our next podcast. But Craig, thank you as always for providing us with your extremely interesting insights.
Yeah, thank you, John. It's a pleasure.
And thank you everyone for listening and watching. As always, please do let us know any questions you have about this or any other network or telecoms topic. You can get in touch with us through our website at networkcollective.co.uk or any of our usual social channels. And we look forward to talking with you again soon.